All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful Sunday. I hope you all had a great 4th of July. I was up here last night about 9:30, 10 o'clock or so, and there was half a dozen, I don't know if it was any of you guys, half a dozen cars here, and it sounded like it was a war going on outside. There would be this, I was up here practicing, and there would be, in my not boxers, in my basketball shorts. I'm not going to tell you what else was, you know what, let's just, good morning, everybody. It's a great Sunday. Basketball shorts and a t-shirt. I wasn't anywhere formal, And there would be a boom, and I would startle every, 70 times in a row. I'd startle, and I'd listen, and it would sound like shrapnel hitting the roof. I don't doubt that's what it was, but I just heard the sound. So it was interesting, to say the least. Hopefully you had a memorable, not that memorable, 4th of July, but hopefully you had a nice Independence Day weekend. We're thankful that you're here on this Lord's Day. It's a special Sunday, not just because of, obviously, the fact that it's the Lord's Day. It's our privilege to gather and worship God. But on this particular Lord's Day, as soon as I'm done speaking, we'll have the invitation song and finish all of that, and then hand the mic over to Sean once more, and he'll MC the ceremony, if you will, for lack of a better word, to honor our seniors who have graduated high school. So that's a special occasion. I'll come back to that at the very end of the sermon. Let's focus now on the sermon that we're going to be considering this morning, which is itself the third of a 4-part series that Alex and I began late last month, pardon me. I got boxers on my mind now, I'm all messed up. Late last month, Alex and I started this series on contentment, just simply entitled, Be Happy with Your Blank. Be happy with ... And the idea is to fix our eyes on Jesus as part of our annual series. And so in looking at that in different ways, we thought, well, contentment is an excellent subject to consider in that case, because if you're not fixing your eyes on Jesus, it's because you're looking for something else to fill in the gap that should be filled by Christ. And so that constant quest for something more, that constant search for something better, leads to an uncontented life. And so Christianity and contentment are hand-in-hand ideas. You cannot be content and be a Christian. You can't be a Christian and not be content. And so we thought, let's take 4 things that are found all over our lives. Our jobs, our things that we have in our lives, our spouses, and our children. Whether we are the child or the parent of the child, that relationship. We have those things, and it's important for us to appreciate through the prism of contentment those things. Already, at the beginning of this series, I was this first speaker, and I spoke on Be Happy with Your Kids. And there's 1,000 ways you can take a sermon on parenthood and your relationship with your children. We just focused on just one aspect of it by looking at the famous parable of the Prodigal Son, really the parable of the forgiving father, and that was the way we framed it. Because though the children, both sons, made terrible mistakes, the father still loved them, sought for them, went out to meet them, and desired for them all along to come home. He wasn't happy with them in their sins, but he wanted to be, and he took the effort and the steps to get them that way. And then last week, Alex talked to us about being happy with our spouses. Being happy with them and recognizing the reality that not everybody is, and everyone sees the flaws, just like we see the flaws in everyone. We see the flaws in our spouse, and they see the flaws in us. But the solution is not to change spouses if you see flaws, it's to change self, as Alex illustrated last week. If there's a change that needs to be made, start with yourself. What can you do? What can I do to improve that relationship so my spouse will be happy with me and we can have contentment together in our relationship? There's one more sermon in the series. Alex will cover it next week. Be happy with your jobs. So I'll let him close us out and introduce that and so forth then. But for right now this morning, what we're talking about is be happy with the most generic word we could think of to catch everything else in the box, stuff. You say kids, it's very specific, and you know what you're talking about, the parent-child relationship. You say spouse, it's very specific. You're just talking about the husband-wife relationship. You say job, it's very specific. You're just talking about the employer-employee relationship. But you say stuff, that's a big box, and everything else that you could talk about fits into it. So if our series is on contentment, we need a sermon in the series that just kind of generally considers the idea of contentment and see how we as a people, not as Americans, not even necessarily just as Christians, but just we as people who live are the recipients of many great blessings. And we are a people who have suffered many great losses. How do we handle that? How do you handle it when something great comes your way? How do you handle it when you have great things and it's taken away? Or if you grow up in an environment where you never had the things that other people had? How do you handle that? As a Christian, you can know how. And let me tell you, if you look around the world, everybody is wrestling with this problem. Either not knowing how to handle the privileges they have, not knowing how to handle not growing up with privilege, or having their privileges taken away. People in this world today do not know how to handle it. The solution, as always, is Christ. And so we have a relevant message. Not the sermon, but we as Christians have a relevant message that we can take to a very difficult, hurting, hate-filled world out there. Let's start with the subject. It was read to us, the text. Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. I want to read it again just to get it fresh on our minds once more. And all we're going to do, I have just a very simple, short sermon because Sean has a little bit that he wants to do after, so I want to give him time. But I want to just walk us through these verses, 11, 12, and 13 of Philippians 4. Let's start by just reading it. Again, Paul says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and how to abound. Everywhere in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and suffer need." And here's the verse everyone knows, "I can do all things through Christ," which, or a more modern, easier translation, who, he's talking about the person, who strengthens me. So, just to summarize Paul's statement there, this is chapter 4 of Philippians. This is his closing remarks. He is wrapping up his text. A letter that he wrote from jail, if you know your Bible history and your background to your Bible books. He was in prison. He was in a suffering situation. And he's writing the most encouraging, confident building, be happy with what you have in your situation in Jesus book that the New Testament has to offer. In the worst kind of scenario imaginable. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's why the Holy Spirit inspired that book in that time. And so as he's writing that message, he wraps it up with this amazing closing statement. There's a little bit more of the chapter left, but this is the great thesis to the whole book. I don't want you to think, after everything that I've said 3 chapters on now, Paul writes, I don't want you to think that I'm talking about you need to feel sorry for me because of all the things I don't have. Or that I'm worried about all the things I don't have. That's not what I'm talking about, because I've learned in whatever state I'm in, having a lot or having nothing or having a little, in whatever state I'm in victory or defeat, in whatever state I'm in, full or hungry, no matter what, I am going to be, our key word, content. How, Paul? What's the secret? How can you possibly? I can do all things through Christ, who gives me the strength to do those things. Now let's just break it down. Look at the beginning of the text. Now I'm not talking about wanting. The word want is not the opposite, but it's a very distinct and different word from the word need. And we know that. Sometimes we use them interchangeably. Children especially do that. I need chocolate cake. Well, you don't need, I don't want to speak for you. I certainly don't need it anymore. You don't need chocolate cake. You may really, really want chocolate cake. You need food, but you just want something sweet. You need to eat. You need to live. You don't have to have the nicest house on the block. You just maybe want the nicest house on the block. So we use those two words sometimes interchangeably when we shouldn't. They're very distinct. A need is something you have to have. And so you desire the thing you have to have. That's very human, very normal. A want is something you want to have. And we desire the things we want to have. That's also very human and very normal and very dangerous, if not checked. But the word, as Paul uses it, just means to be lacking. If I am in want, it doesn't mean, the way it's used here, I want. They're two different words. Paul is not saying, I'm not talking about wanting things. He's saying, I'm not talking about being in want. I'm not talking about lacking things. Now, to me, that's even more remarkable than if he just said, I'm not talking about wanting things. Because in his present situation, anybody in his situation would have needs and things that they were considering essential that they were lacking. He's in prison. He wants, surely, freedom. But he is not in want for freedom. You might say he needs probably better food and shelter conditions, because I don't know what kind of prisons they had back then. I doubt they're as nice as the prisons we have today, and even the ones we have today are not great. So I doubt he was getting his 3 square meals. I doubt he was sleeping on a padded bed. I doubt there weren't rats crawling around constantly looking to nibble on him. He was probably not in the best of scenarios, probably not in the best of situations. He would need, therefore, better environment. But he's not in want for a better environment. How can that possibly be? It doesn't even make sense. There are obviously things, Paul, you are lacking. You are lacking freedom. And he says, yeah, but I'm not sweating it. It's a fact. I'm not going to deny it, but I'm not in want. This is not about wants and needs. This is about in want, and I'm not in want. I'm not really feeling like I'm lacking anything. How? Explain that, because the world doesn't understand that. So explain that, Paul, and thankfully he does in the next text. He says, let's get to the word content. My outline's on the screen. So look at the other word here at the end of this text. You have want to be lacking. Look at this word. This is the secret. This is how Paul is able to do it. Before he breaks it down for us, he sums it up in one word. I am, because I'm not in want, I am content. What does the word content really mean? We know how to use it. We could have put it in a sentence, but the idea behind it is an amazing word. It comes from 2 Greek words put together, compound, to make one. The first is the word autos, from which we get the word auto, like an autopilot, self-piloting, right? Well, this is autos, means self. And then the other word is archeo, which means to erect a wall, or to build a fortification, or to secure yourself, typically behind something from an enemy advancement. But that's not this kind of fortification. The way it's used in this context, Paul's not describing building a wall to prevent outside physical forces from affecting him. He is talking about something philosophical. He's talking about something internal. So he says, I am not worried about the things that I don't have, the things I'm lacking. I'm choosing not to be in want. How, Paul? Because I have erected this spiritual wall. I have secured myself. That's the word contentment. Don't you need that? Don't you want that? Aren't you lacking this? Shouldn't you be striving to achieve that? No, I'm secure in who I am. I'm content with what I have. That's the idea. You see how those words make that idea? I'm secure. I'm safe. I'm not feeling like I'm missing something. I need to establish the wall better. No, I'm confident. I'm okay. I'm taken care of. Can you explain that a little more deeply, Paul? Sure. He says, I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. I know how to, everywhere in all things I am instructed, both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. In other words, no matter what the scenario is, Paul says, I have the same reaction to it, even though the things he says are wildly opposite. Now, if you don't have Jesus, because that's verse 13, none of this makes any sense, because these are so opposite things that you're either going to be on one side of the spectrum or the other. In the world, if you don't have Christ, all you have is the world. And the world takes, and the world gives, and you take in the world, and you lose in the world, and so you're either a haver or a wanter. You're either a taker or a giver. So you're either on this side or that side. You're either someone who is abounding and having, or maybe you lose it all, and now you're down here. But you can't be having the same attitude in both scenarios, because you're either striving to achieve or you're desperate to hold on to. And Paul says, I'm okay no matter what comes my way. Let's break down these things he's talking about here. The word abased. Listen to the word. Base. Alex, you slap a bass, don't you? Base, low. I know how to be brought low. I know how to handle it. When adversity strikes, I am knocked down. Whether I'm on a high horse or just a normal horse, when I'm knocked to the ground, I know how to handle it. I know how to be a good loser, not a sore loser. But then flip it. I know how to abound. A word which could have 2 different meanings. It could be philosophical, metaphorical, kind of a intangible quality of just excelling. I know how to just have everything go my way. Everything's coming up roses. I know how to have everything go my way in a way you can't really quantify. Or you can quantify it. I can measure how much I have increased this year over last year. I can consider my yield, and I can say, look how much I've gained, X number of things. I'm so much more. I have so much more. And I know how to handle it when I have so much more, because it's not a sin to have more. You just have it. Because more and less and rich and poor are relative terms. You may think you're poor, I can show you places where they would treat you like you're a king because of how much you have. You may think you're rich. You know people who have more. It's relative. But either way, concerning the individual, relatively, Paul says, if I have a lot or if I'm brought down, if I'm excelling or having a lot or nothing, I know how to handle it. Keep going. Everywhere in all things, whether full or hungry. In other words, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what the scenario, whether I always had a lot or that I haven't, I lose it. I never had a lot or I suddenly won the lottery, to use a figure of speech. I know how to handle it. How do you handle it, Paul? I can abound and I can suffer need. How, Paul? I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Here's the verse everyone knows. And we know it because we've taken it out of context. And we've taken it so far out of context, we've gone all the way back around to maybe sometimes putting it back in context, but all the way there, all these other ways that we've misapplied this text. Not the least of which is a sporting event where the quarterback has it painted under his eye. What is that stuff anyway? I was in the band. They put this black here, and they write with the white letter, and they say, Phil 3 or 4:13. I can do all things through Christ. So the quarterback has that, and I'm not specifically thinking of Tebow, but you all are. The quarterback has that, and he throws the winning touchdown, so you know I'm not talking about Tebow. He throws a winning touchdown, and they're interviewing him, and it was the game winner, and they say, how did you do that? It was amazing. You had 1 second left, and you shook the guy, and you threw it. Well, I knew I could do all things through Christ. First of all, you threw the interception that caused the game to be tied in the first place. So what, was Jesus just changing his mind when you do that? But the other guy threw the interception to give the ball back to you. He had Philippians 4:13 written right here too. He had Hebrews 13:5, if you want to do a cut. He had Hebrews 13:5 written there. So he had the same idea. Is God just not a Razorback fan? I think we all know the answer to that by now. Move right on past that. So you see the problem? You take that verse out of context and you have idiots who think they can jump off a building and fly because they can do all things through Christ. That's not what Paul's talking about. He has told you what the all things are in this text. I can do all things. What things? Well, I can be abased. When things that bring me low happen, I can handle it through Christ. I know how to abound. When things that lift me up, I know how to be a good winner, which we never talk about in our culture. All kinds of lessons that no one listens to anyway about not being a sore loser. Nobody talks about being a good winner and not being a sore winner. But Paul says, I'm not a sore winner. When I'm lifted up, I know how to handle it. When I'm full or hungry, I know how to handle it. But Paul, when you're hungry, don't you need food? Yes, but I'm not in want. I may want it. I may need it, but I'm not in want. I'm not feeling lacking because I have what I have by the grace of God. I can handle it. I can get through it through Christ who gives me strength. Oh wait, I forgot my pithy little phrase. So take all these things that he says here. And if your attitude regarding contentment is, well, I'm content, and it just so happens that I have a bunch of stuff, and then I lose all my stuff, I just don't feel content anymore. You were never content. Because you're defining your contentment by the amount of stuff you have. You know how to abound, but you don't know how to be abased. You know how to be up, but you don't know how to be down. If it's not contentment no matter what, it isn't contentment. It's worldliness. Because the world have, the world takes, the world gives, the world steals, and the world is up and down and angry and happy, just with the changing of the moods. Happenstance, happiness, that's the idea. But a Christian, and I regret that we even titled this thing Be Happy With, because it should have been content with. A Christian doesn't worry about happiness or circumstance or happenstance. A Christian recognizes good things are going to happen by the grace of God. Bad things are going to happen, sometimes by the punishment, the discipline of God, sometimes just because the devil is out there and he's not a good cat. Sometimes the world just takes away, and I can handle it through Christ who gives me the strength to handle victory and defeat. Contentment requires Christ. Go out into the world and talk to those people, your non-brethren neighbors and friends who are hurting, who are struggling, who are saying, this is not fair, that is not right, this should be done, that should stop being done. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done or should be done. However you want to put those very vague phrases of mine into whatever the political situation is in the world today in all the various ways. All I'm saying is, your lot is dealt to what it is. The world will treat you to treat you. Things are going to happen. How are you going to handle it personally? Are you going to moan and groan and complain? Are you going to fight and scream and kick? Are you going to burn and rip apart and scream and cry and attack? Or are you going to say, this is what I have. I'm going to be okay. Now, you say that to your non-Christian neighbor, and they're going to look at you like you have two heads because they're your non-Christian neighbor. And so you need to teach them, show them the power of contentment. You're going to lose things. You're going to grow up never having something. You're going to suddenly be given a lot. How are you going to handle it? Through Christ, who gives you strength. This was a difficult sermon for me because the easy way to talk about contentment is to talk about how your stuff doesn't matter. Don't worry about these things. Don't think about these things. But the sermon title is You Should Be Happy With. You should be content with. It's a positive, not a negative thing. You have what you have. It's not a bad thing unless you stole it. You have what you have. It's not a bad thing. Be content with it, or bad things will happen. Now, put a pin in that. I'm going to come back to the invitation. I have something else. This is for our seniors, okay? So I don't have it memorized. This is Senior Sunday. And I thought, well, is there a way I can tie this message into, the contentment message into graduating seniors? And I think I can, as the little train said, but I'm going to get there in a minute at the end of this. Give me just 3 more minutes, maybe 5. I just want to say something to our graduates since we're about to honor them. First of all, North Heights congratulates our graduates on graduating, on passing the arbitrarily assigned academic standards that are constantly changing. You waded through all that, and you got out. So congratulations. You are considered now by the state prepared to go out into the world. Whether you actually are or not, we'll be the judge of that. I don't know. You may be. I wasn't. I can just speak for myself. May 27th or whatever it was, 2002, I walked down the aisle at Wonderview High School, and they gave me the piece of paper that said, you go out and you can own the world now. And I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I still don't have a clue, but I'm better at faking it. That's growing up, by the way. Do they teach you in school how to balance a checkbook and do your taxes? And they're still not teaching that? But they teach you long division, right? That's going to come in real handy. You're going to really use that with your phones in your pocket. Hang on, I'm supposed to be positive. I have my positive part here. Listen, young people, and I mean specifically graduating high schools, going out into the world, as they say. You are the next generation. And that scares, hold on, Ralph, don't amen yet. That scares a lot of the older generation. Not Ralph, but a lot of the older generation. Get scared of that idea. Because they see you and they see who you are, not who you're becoming. And they kind of freeze you there and they say, well, you don't know as much as I know. You can't do as much as I can do. So you'll never know. You'll never do. You never will. So who are you to tell me? Who are you to go out and stand on my level? And so it scares them. And listen, spoiler alert, all the stupid things that you think are great, your kids are going to think are stupid. It's just a cycle. Because the old generation that's scared of this current generation was once upon a time the current generation the older generation was scared of. Every generation comes along, and the previous one is terrified of them because they don't understand them. They don't understand their music, they don't understand their culture, they don't understand their slang. And it's scary, and we tend to attack the things we're scared of. So young people, you have a very limited window of time, you seniors in particular. You have a very small window of time in which to actually make a difference in the world. Because for the first part of your time, you finished 1/5 of your life, roughly. You have 4/5 left to go. For the first part of that 4/5 that remains, you're going to hear, you're too young, you don't know, sit down, let me do it, let me show you how it's supposed to be done the right way. And then at the back end of that period of time, you're going to constantly hear, you're too old. You don't know anymore. There's a better way. Just sit down, let me show you how we do it, or just let me do it for you. And no one's going to listen to you here, and no one's going to listen to you over there. And you have this little window of time in the middle where you actually have a voice. And people are actually going to listen. You always have a voice, and you're always going to share it, but no one's listening right now, I'm sorry to tell you. But there will be a time when people will listen. Don't waste that time falling into the same traps that my generation fell into, which is just chasing after stuff and more stuff and caring too much about their appearance, physically, socially. Don't fall into the same traps. And maybe, if you put your focus on Christ and you don't care as much about stuff, and you find contentment, you can spread that message to a frustrated, lost, in more ways than one world. And you can make a real difference in the world. Don't be afraid of anyone telling you that's not the way to do it. Do it wrong. How many things were done wrong that ended up being the standard? Elon Musk put a Cadillac in space 3 years ago, just because. Nobody said do that. So he said, well, then I'll do it. And so he put a Cadillac in space. People will tell you, don't do it. Try it. I'm not saying things you know that are wrong, but just the wrong way to do something. Try it. And maybe you can make a difference, and people start listening to you. But don't just settle for making a difference physically. Don't just settle for achieving greatness for yourself, or for raising your physical stature, your social stature. Show the world Christ, because that's what my generation failed to do, and the generation before them, and the generation before them, and the generation before them, going all the way back to when Adam and Eve ate the fruit. We failed to do what we're supposed to do. I have one last thing, and then I'll close. When you go out there and you act like a leader, remember that you are going to be a flawed leader, leading flawed people. You're going to be petty. You're going to be hypocritical. You're going to be flat wrong. In short, you're going to be people. That's how we are. That's how our parents were. That's how their parents were. That's how your children are going to be, flawed people. The only hope you have to break the cycle is to show Christ, who is flawless. To be more like Christ and to emulate Him wherever you can. So we bid you good success on your graduating, but the older you get, the less it'll matter. You're going to go out into the world, and that's where you're going to make a difference. Make it with Christ. Make it through Christ, who gives you strength. If you are here and you're not a Christian, if you don't have the peace that passes understanding, if you don't have the sense that no matter what comes your way, you're going to be able to handle it because Christ is how you'll handle it. If you don't have that feeling within you, it's because you're lacking Jesus Christ, the essential element. If you don't have that, you will search your whole life for something to simulate it, and you'll never accomplish it. You'll fill the hole in your heart with everything you can find, and all you will find is excess and worldliness, and it will waste your life and all the potential you have with it. Find Christ, find contentment, and you'll be made whole. Believe in Jesus. Repent to Jesus. Confess your faith in Jesus, and then be baptized into Jesus so He can wash away your sins. Then just live faithfully for Jesus. You're not going to be perfect, or you wouldn't need Jesus. Just be faithful. And Jesus will come back, and you can live with Jesus forever. If you have a need, please make it known right now. Please come as we stand and sing.